So YouTuber Madlittlepixel did a video of ranking what are the best and worst of Nintendo's controllers. Since I happen to have all of them here, I thought why not make a short video of me ranking what are the best and worst of Nintendo's controllers. Now I think they're all really great. They all have both their pros and cons, and honestly, I don't really see any of their controllers, being that bad by any means, because all of Nintendo's controllers, in my opinion, they're really great. But I wanted to rank which ones are the best and worst. So, start off here, we have the NES gamepad. Now, the Nintendo Entertainment System was one of the first systems to truly modernize what the video game industry would become today. And when I think of the NES gamepad, I think of the NES gamepad being gaming's first true modern controller. Now, the controller itself doesn't really need introduction. You got the D-pad, you got the select and start, you got the B and A. And honestly, the controller itself is really good. When you play with the NES, you really feel like it defines retro. And when you play with this controller, it just speaks retro itself. I don't really have any grips with this controller. I do think this controller is still really great for its age. And whenever I play the NES, I never have a hesitation using this, because this to me still fits in the palm of my hand. And honestly, there really isn't much features to go on the NES controller. Most games on the NES kind of play the same, of course, which different with, of course, games having different controls at times, but not on the NES. Most games just use the same B and A standard with the D-pad. There really isn't much of a difference. So I think this controller itself still plays pretty good. Do I think it's aged with other Nintendo controllers? Not really, but I still think it's still a controller that defines retro gaming. I think for me, this is not, in my opinion, the best controller, but it is a good controller. I would give this one a 7 out of 10. The next one we have here is the Super Nintendo controller. Now, the Super Nintendo controller needs no introduction. The Super Nintendo is one of my favorite systems of all time, and not only that, but the controller itself has to be one of my favorite video game controllers of all time. I think, to me, the NES controller may have modernized what video game controllers would be, but I think this perfected it. And when you look at it, you're like, dude, it's a huge upgrade. It felt, excuse me. It's a huge upgrade to what the NES gamepad is. And as you can see, the difference is, well, there's two new buttons. The Y and X button, which we would all see in future iterations of all Nintendo controllers. And I mean, other video game controllers too. The Xbox, of course. And as you could tell, the newest addition to this controller, move this one out of the way, is the L and R shoulder buttons. This helped a lot when it came to games like Super Castlevania 4, Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, and of course the RPG games. There's other games that utilize the L and R trigger buttons. Of course, fighting games. Fighting games were utilized them more. The D-pad itself is really, really, really good. Of course, you still have select and start, and the controller itself is well designed. I mean, I could hold this controller with like one hand, and I mean, it just kind of fits on the palm of my hand, the entire thing. Kind of reminds it. I'll be real. Sometimes when I look at the controller, it kind of reminds me of a dog bone a little bit. I don't know why. But the Super Nintendo controller is definitely still a great controller. I still think this controller still ages good and plays pretty good. I give this controller, I'd give it a 9 out of 10. The next controller, which is controversial because most people like it and most people hate this controller, is the N64 controller. Now, where do I stand when I think of the N64 controller? I like it. I don't have a problem with this controller, although I can understand why some people may not like it. Some people may not like the way you hold it. For example, if I can try to hold my camera, see, you would have, like, if you were playing a 3D platformer like Mario, or if you're playing an action-adventure game like Zelda, you would have to hold the controller like this, which I never have a problem with that. You would have to hold it from the middle, and then, of course, B and A would be on the right. And then there would be other games that would like utilize the D-pad where you hold it like this. Not many games really didn't utilize the D-pad. I wouldn't really say that the N64 controller. There was a lot of games that utilized the D-pad, but of course the newest addition to the controller was the analog stick. This was the first video game controller to include a analog stick. You know, obviously Nintendo weren't the first, wasn't the first company to include joysticks on their controllers. Obviously Atari included joysticks on their controllers back in the 70s, but Nintendo revolutionized having analog joysticks on their controllers, and it worked really great. If you played games like Super Mario 64, Banjo-Kazooie, Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, GoldenEye 007, a lot of games utilize the analog joystick really great. And the newest addition to the controller would be the C buttons. Now, I never cared much for these buttons growing up. They were utilized in games, obviously, like Ocarina of Time. You can use it for like the items. GoldenEye 007, you can use it to like sidestep and look and kind of like look up and down. Mario 64, you can use it to like switch the camera, and it's just really great. But not something like I would care for, but still it's a pretty fine controller. And this marked the first and only Nintendo controller to get rid of the X and Y buttons. You only got B and A. You still have the triggers. You have the L and R triggers, and you also have the Z trigger, which was used in many good games, like GoldenEye. GoldenEye is the one game I can think of right now that used the Z button really good. And then obviously the D-pad, which wasn't really used. The only games I can think that utilize the D-pad right now were like Pokemon Stadium, and I think the wrestling games. The wrestling games also utilize the D-pad really good. But other than that, I don't think it's a bad controller. It's fine with me. It's I can understand why some people may not like this controller. They don't like the way it's designed. They don't like the way you hold it. Another thing too, I forgot to mention, what this controller lets you do in the back, you can install a memory pack, or of course, like you see here, the rumble pack. So yeah, that's a nice touch. I think this controller, I'd probably would give it a 7.5 out of 10. Do I think this controller has aged pretty good? Not really, but I still think it was a great controller for its time, and this controller was defined for 3D gaming, so I don't think you can really, take points of that off, but I would definitely give it a 7.5. The next controller, which, and I'm going to be a little biased because this one's my main favorite, not just Nintendo, but main favorite video game controller of all time, and that is the Nintendo GameCube Controller. The GameCube Controller to me, is a video game controller. This is how I define and see a video game controller. How how it is. Obviously, like, the GameCube controller it just speaks gaming. When you hold this controller, when you play with this controller, you just know you're just going to have a good time with it because it just fits in the palm of your hand. Not only that, but it just feels good to play with. And obviously, the GameCube controller is a huge step to the N64. Of course, my main favorite thing about the controller are the analog triggers. I love the triggers on this controller. The fact that Nintendo included analog triggers is just awesome. And then the Z button was also made on the top, which is a pretty nice touch. The Y and X buttons made a return. Start button is still the same on the middle. B and A, of course. The newest addition, which would be replacing the C buttons, is the C stick. It still acts like the C buttons, obviously. I never, cared much for the C stick a lot. I remember, like, only games I would utilize it would be, platformers, especially when you have to move the camera, which was fine. That obviously was fine. Never cared too much because like I mentioned, I didn't care much for the C buttons, so I didn't really care if this got an upgrade. But still, it's a nice touch. Probably the only downside on the controller is the D-pad. The D-pad itself is really, really small, and not a lot of games utilize it. But this controller itself is great for any game. Most notably, this controller is used currently with the Super Smash Brothers competitive scene. And as someone as myself who is a Smash Brothers player, this is my controller. I obviously say whenever I play Smash Brothers, whenever I go to someone's house and they have Smash on, I'm like, if you don't have a GameCube controller, I cannot play Smash. That's my one recommendation. You gotta have a GameCube controller so I can play Smash Brothers. You gotta have a GameCube controller. And yeah, and the back, not really much. It's just same copyright text as most controllers would have. But this controller itself it just speaks gaming. This controller, I give it a 10 out of 10. And if you think about it, without this controller, I don't think controllers like the Xbox 360, Xbox One, and Series X controllers, I feel like, Microsoft took a lot of inspiration from the GameCube's controller when they were designing the 360 controller and the Xbox Series controllers, and of course the Xbox One too. I feel like they took inspiration from the GameCube controller to make their controller better, because I was not a huge fan of the OG Xbox controller, but I feel like when they went to the Xbox 360 and Series controller, which those controllers are phenomenal, I feel like they took inspiration from this controller. So this controller is a 10 out of 10. This one, maybe a little controversial because I've said it before. The Wii is not my favorite Nintendo system. It's my least favorite, but of course, you got the Wii Remote and the Wii Nunchuck. Now, this one just to me, this one to me just doesn't really satisfy me, because as someone who's not into motion controls, I don't like the design of the Wii's remote. I think, in my opinion, I understood they were trying to make it look like a TV remote, which is understandable. They try to make it sorry about that, my window's open, you can hear background noises outside. But anyway, the Wii remote obviously, it's just not really a great controller. It just isn't. It just, to me, just doesn't feel like a gaming controller. I feel like it just doesn't feel like it just fits in the palm of your hand. It like, when you use this thing, it just feels like a gimmick, because obviously the Wii is a gimmick at the end of the day. Even though, yes, I love all the first party games that were on the Wii, but I still agree that even as as someone who loves Nintendo, man, I can agree that the Wii was just nothing more than a gimmick. And these controllers say it all. They were just a gimmick at the end of the day, and they did serve its purpose. Obviously, they served its purpose to give the motion controls for the Wii, and obviously you'd have to point up to the TV for the sensor bar. And of course, there are many great games on the Wii. Of course, like I mentioned, there are games like the Super Mario Galaxy games, the Zelda games, except for Skyward Sword on the Wii. Well, that game is better on Switch. There is the Metroid Prime trilogy, the Kirby games, Smash Brothers. I mean, there's a lot of great games that utilize the Wii's remote really good. Not Smash, but two games I can think of on the top of my mind that I love using this controller for are the Mario Galaxy games, 1 and 2. But that's pretty much it, man. When I use this controller, I just feel like it's nothing more than a gimmick, and it just doesn't make you feel like you want to game more on this. So honestly, I don't like this controller. I think this controller is probably the only one that I can say is my least favorite, and I just don't like, the whole idea of motion controls in video games. I'm not a huge motion controls guy, never will be. But still, the Wii's remote is what it is. And as you can tell, mine is the special edition Mario Wii remote, and it has the Motion Plus inside, which is really cool. I got this pretty used, but I mean, it's the Mario remote, so you can't go wrong with the Mario remote. And I wanted to get one that has the Motion Plus attachment inside, because I wanted to get one of those remotes so I can play Wii games on the Virtual Console on the Wii U. But anyway, I'd give the Wii remote a 4 out of 10, and the Nunchuck as well, because I don't know, just to me, it's just not my favorite. If it's your favorite, that's totally fine, but this is just my list at the end of the day. The next we have, whew, that was a little dusty since I last played it. But yeah, the the Wii U gamepad. Now, yes, I hadn't used this thing in a while. I did clean it a bit yesterday because I was playing with it. I was playing Wii U yesterday, but I guess more dust came on it. Oh, okay, well, whatever, fuck it. I'll clean this up after the video. But anyway, the Wii U gamepad, I like this thing. I don't see why a lot of people have problems with the Wii U gamepad. I honestly don't really see anything bad with it. I really like the complexity of it. I like the features. I don't think it's too bulky for me. Maybe I'm just saying that because I have big hands, and when I use something small, it cramps my hand a lot. So when I use something like this, it just fits on the palm of my hand, and I never have a bad time playing with this thing. I love this. I love this controller. I don't think it's a perfect controller by any means, but I love using this thing. Of course, as you can tell, of course, you got your D-pad. You got both analog sticks, Y and X buttons, of course, select and start, which the Wii had, and we only had A and B. Sorry, I didn't mention that. Of course, you got the power and TV and the TV remote control. You can use this as a TV remote if you wanted to, which is pretty cool. I don't do that, but if you want to, that's totally cool. Of course, it's got infrared right here to connect because it is a wireless controller. And you have an NFC port where you can use amiibos, like right here. For example, you can use amiibos, tap into them, and unlock features. So that's a pretty cool. Pretty cool addition. And I really like gaming on this. The only downside I may not be a fan of is the screen. The screen only outputs 720p, and it doesn't really look that good. When you're trying to play something like Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess HD, it looks pretty bad. And usually when you play something like Super Mario 3D World, that looks fine. But still, if you're trying to play like adventure games, it's not going to look that good. Platformers look alright, I guess. But still, I think the Wii U gamepad is definitely a huge improvement. Although, of course, the Wii U itself wasn't really a financial success. As you know, the Wii U was a commercial flop. So it really wasn't, the potential for the Wii U wasn't really utilized a lot because Nintendo didn't really know what the hell the Wii U was. They really didn't know how to market it good. So it's really a shame because the Wii U was such a great underrated system, and I think in my opinion, the Wii U is better than the Wii, in my opinion. That's just my only opinion. If you disagree, that's fine. That's just my opinion only. But I like the Wii U more. The Wii U felt more of a gaming system than the original Wii did. So I think the Wii U had a better library. But yeah, the controller itself just fits really good. It fits really good. And I don't have any cons. The only con I would say about the controller, the battery life. The battery life on this thing is fucking terrible. It fucking sucks. Like, I fucking hate the battery life on this fucking controller. It's only output to 2 hours, and the battery drains pretty fast. I don't really like that, man. I hate the battery life on this controller. And yeah, also too, that it's only playable on 32 feet, which sucks too. You have to be close to the system to play it, which you can't take this anywhere. Maybe if you want to take this and you're taking a shit and you want to play Wii U games when you're taking a shit, maybe if your restroom is close to your room, then maybe it'll work, because I can kind of do that. But I don't even do that a lot, so it's like, yeah. So I don't think this would be a thing to take when you're taking a shit. But yeah, I would say the Wii U gamepad is an 8 out of 10. I really like this controller. I have no gripes on, minus those two gripes I only talked about. But I don't know, it's a great controller. Oh, and also, yeah, I forgot to show you the trigger buttons. Huge improvement too. And then we get to our final controllers to talk about the infamous Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons. Now, I love the Switch. I feel like the Switch may have become, at one point, my favorite video game console of all time. I feel like it might dethrone the N64 one day. But enough of that. But let's get to talking about the controller. Now, the Joy-Con controller itself feels alright. When you hold it on your hand and you use it, it actually feels really good. It actually feels not that bad. As someone who has big hands, I thought I was going to have a problem holding these, but I mean, I don't. But I don't really like to use them separately. I've used them once, and it feels pretty good. It's definitely not that bad of a way to play Switch games if you just want to chillax and just play Switch with just holding both of them without without using the grip or anything. Yeah, and of course you have the left Joy-Con, of course. Replaces the D-pad, of course, because as you can tell, the Joy-Con, since you can take them apart, you can basically play one controller and pass the other one to another player and play two-player games, obviously, like this. And I think that was really cool when the Switch first introduced that, and still, it's a pretty cool thing. The controllers itself, of course, have they have HD Rumble, which really isn't something that I care for, but it's pretty cool that it has that. And of course, the right one has the infrared right here, which is supposed to, if I remember correctly, this was like way to like read how much like the controller could like. I'll have to look up what this is again. Sorry about that. But I do remember something about the presentation saying that the controller was able to like detect the it's supposed to detect something. I forgot what it was, but I'll try to read in the description. I'll look for what it is, and I'll put on the description what this thing is. So that way, like you can know what it is, or maybe in the comments you may tell me what it is. Of course, you got the home button, and of course, both have joysticks, plus buttons, and the other one has a minus button, and of course, the analog triggers, which are really good. You have these SL and SR buttons. These are only used when you're going to play, these are the triggers you're going to use when you just play the Joy-Con like this. And of course, you can hook the Joy-Cons to a grip and play it like if you're playing an actual controller. My only problem with this controller is, and you know it, the drift. The drift is probably the only thing I hate about this controller, because the controller itself looks like it's designed really well. Like when you look at it, you're like, dude, this controller looks pretty much designedly well. The only problem is that the more use you get out of it, the more it drifts. And if you know, Nintendo currently right now and still is actively handling a lawsuit that they're thrown against because of the Joy-Cons being drifted, which, I mean, says a lot, Nintendo, and you say that Joy-Con drift doesn't exist. Well, look at YouTube videos and you'll know like a bunch of Joy-Cons drifting. I mean, I used to have a tons of Joy-Cons on my drawer, and I had to sell them all because they all drifted. So, yeah. But honestly, this to me, it's a well-designed controller, but I do not like this controller. I just think, in my opinion, that the Joy-Cons could have been better. Not saying that the Joy-Cons suck. Well, they suck for one reason. They suck because of the drift. But design-wise, they look really cool, and it plays really good. Though I really wish that they could have designed the Joy-Con a little bit more better, in my opinion. But still, it is what it is. I still think it's a pretty good-looking controller. It's well-designed. It fits really good in the palm of your hand. But I don't think it's a really great controller just because of that Joy-Con drift. Honorable mention goes to the Nintendo Switch Pro Controller. Now, I really like this controller. I know some people have a love and hate relationship with this controller. I actually like this controller. I think it's well designed, it's well unique, and it feels more better than using the Nintendo Switch Joy-Con, obviously. There's no denying that. But, of course, the controller is a huge improvement from, like, the Wii U's Pro Controller, which I don't have one, but the Wii U's Pro Controller was similar to the Wii U gamepad. Like, the analog sticks were on the top, which I did not like that. I thought that was more for the gamepad. I think the analog stick should have been on the right, which, thank God, when they made the Switch Pro Controller, they did do that. It's on the right. And it is a reminiscence of, like, the GameCube Controller, but only difference is, well, both are analog sticks, and this controller has more shoulder buttons, which I like that. And honestly, this controller itself is really good. I think honestly the controller itself fits really good in the palm of my hand. I feel my hands feel comfortable every time I use this. And so the analog sticks themselves are decent. Same analog sticks as you would know for any controller. Of course, you got the X and Y buttons, B and A, of course, which the Joy-Con has. You got the minus, plus, screenshot, and home button, which the Joy-Cons have. Nothing special. You only got the Nintendo logo on the back. So this controller, I'd give it a 9 out of 10. And the Joy-Cons, I'd give them probably like a I'd probably give them like a 6, just because like they're fine like to use like at first, but then I probably would take points off of it too, just because if these controllers would have been fine, they probably would have had like a 7.5. Probably they would have had like a 7.5, but I have to give it a 6 because of that Joy-Con drift. So yeah. So anyway, that's how I'd rank Nintendo controllers, and I hope you liked this video, and I hope you learned a little bit more about the history of Nintendo's controllers. And till next time, thanks for watching, guys, and see you later.